Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack fascinating research, get those key insights you need.
That's the goal.
So today, we're diving into something, honestly, most of us do every day. Gossip.
Ah, yes, gossip.
Yeah, and it often gets dismissed, right? As trivial, maybe even a bit. Morally suspect.
Definitely has that reputation.
But get this. What if I told you people gossip, on average, about once every 2 hours?
Wow.
It features in something like 14% of our daily conversations. Adds up to about 52 minutes a day.
52 minutes. That's actually quite a bit. About as much as people spend on self-care, apparently.
Exactly. You'd be shocked, wouldn't you? The sheer amount of time.
Yeah.
It suggests this isn't just, idle chatter.
No, not at all. Those numbers point to something more fundamental going on.
Right. So if it's that common, that pervasive, can something we often see as just a guilty pleasure, maybe even unproductive, actually serve a deeper purpose?
A real function.
Yeah. And what really drives us to share info about other people? And maybe even more interesting, how do we decide if we're going to be accurate about it?
That's exactly what we're digging into today. Our mission is to unpack the surprising reasons, often pretty self-serving reasons, behind why we share social information, and crucially, when we choose to be honest about it.
Okay.
We've got some new research that sheds some really incredible light on this basic human behavior.
Okay, let's pull back the curtain then. For, centuries, you've got religious traditions, philosophical ones, warning against gossip.
Right.
Calling it unproductive, malicious even.
Sure, it's often painted in a negative light.
But spending almost an hour a day on it, that strongly suggests there's got to be some significant social function, something important, far beyond just, entertainment.
Absolutely. From an evolutionary standpoint, it looks like the core purpose of gossip is really about acquiring and sharing information that's critical for what researchers call partner choice.
Partner choice, meaning?
Meaning making really important social decisions. Who do you trust? Who should you avoid? Who should you team up with? Gossip helps cut down the uncertainty about people's key traits.
Like, are they friendly? Are they competent? Are they, basically decent?
Exactly. And critically, what can you expect them to do? How will they behave?
So it's really a tool for navigating our, let's face it, complex social world more effectively. Given that, what kind of stuff are we actually talking about when we gossip? Does the research tell us about the specific topics?
It does, actually. The data shows about 60% of gossip is about trustworthiness, warmth, competence. The basics of whether someone's a good bet socially.
Okay. Trustworthiness, warmth, confidence. Makes sense.
And another 14% or so is about people violating social norms. Breaking the rules.
Which also tells you something important about them.
Definitely. If you think about it, these aren't just random tidbits. They're the key things you need to weigh up when you're assessing social risks and rewards. We're sort of building this mental social ledger for everyone.
And this isn't just abstract info floating around, right? People actually use this stuff, this reputational data.
Oh, absolutely. Lab experiments show it consistently. People act on this information in ways that have real consequences.
Like how?
Well, they cooperate more with partners who have a reputation for being generous, for being fair. And on the flip side, people tend to behave more generously themselves when they know their own reputation might get shared.
Ah, so knowing you might be talked about keeps you in line. Potentially.
It's a powerful social feedback loop. We're very aware our reputations can, precede us.
Okay, so the value of getting gossip is pretty clear. It's like social intel, a shortcut to figuring out who's who.
Right. Reduces the guesswork.
But the real puzzle, for me anyway, is why would anyone bother sharing it? Especially if it means revealing maybe unflattering things about others, or heck, even about themselves.
That's the core question. If social knowledge is power, why give it away? Especially honestly.
Yeah, which I think brings us to these two competing ideas, these theories about what's really driving gossip. One seems kind of noble, like gossip is society's truth serum.
The indirect reciprocity idea.
And the other sounds more, pragmatic, maybe a bit cynical. Can you lay out the basic difference for us?
Sure. So theory one, indirect reciprocity. This view suggests we evolved to share info accurately. Why? To reward the good guys, the cooperators, and punish the defectors, the cheaters.
Okay.
The ideal here is that honest gossip helps cooperation take root and stabilize in a society. Makes everyone better off in the long run. It's about maintaining a kind of fair social playing field.
That sounds pretty good, almost altruistic in a way.
Yeah.
But it feels like it hangs on one big assumption.
That people are actually sharing, honestly.
Exactly. Is that assumption safe? Does the research challenge it?
Oh, it absolutely does, and that's the snag. Computer simulations modeling this stuff actually show that dishonest gossip really messes things up. It undermines cooperation.
So if people start lying in their gossip,
The whole system can break down. Which suggests that if indirect reciprocity is working, it must rely heavily on honesty being kept in check by some other means. Something else has to be making people truthful. As one paper bluntly put it, deception basically wrecks the stability of cooperation in these models.
that's a huge caveat. Okay, so if guaranteed honesty isn't the answer, what's the alternative theory? Why else might we share information?
That brings us to the other camp, reputation-based partner choice and social competition theories.
Right.
These theories propose a different driver, maybe a more realistic one. Instead of just fostering cooperation generally, it suggests people share information specifically to snag high-quality partners for themselves.
So it's about me getting good partners.
And also about making yourself look like an attractive partner to those high-quality people. It's fundamentally about choosing. And crucially, about being chosen.
Okay, so there's a self-serving twist, a strategic angle. It's not just about the group, it's about what's good for me, my connections, my opportunities.
Precisely. This viewpoint predicts that gossip should be, well, inherently self-serving, selective.
How so?
It suggests people would share accurate information, sure, but mainly when it benefits them, like making themselves look good or associating with good people. But, and this is key, they'd also be tempted to share dishonest information if that serves their partner choice goals.
Like making a rival look bad.
Exactly. That's the social competition layer. Gossiping not just to boost your own image, but maybe to subtly, or not so subtly, tarnish someone else's. Make them look like a less appealing partner compared to you. Gain that relative advantage.
This sounds incredibly strategic, like a constant social chess game playing out.
In a way, yeah.
But how on earth do you actually study this? Especially the honest versus dishonest part, when people's actual outcomes, like getting chosen or not, are on the line, seems really tricky to capture in a lab setting.
It is, and it's surprisingly rare to find empirical research that really nails that scenario where people's material outcomes are directly affected by sharing potentially dishonest info about other people. But that's where this really clever new study comes in. It was designed specifically to pit these theories against each other in a controlled way.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell us about the setup. How did they put human nature under the microscope here?
All right, so they used Amazon Mechanical Turk, got a huge sample, over 2,400 people, which is great for this kind of behavioral study, gives you diversity.
Okay.
And they set up this meticulous three-stage process. Stage 1, reputation building. Pretty standard stuff here. Subjects played a dictator game.
Ah, the one where you decide how to split money.
Yeah. You start with $1, your partner has 50 cents, you choose. Be generous, give some, be greedy, take some, or just indifferent, do nothing. Simple choice, but it reliably tagged them with a basic reputation. Generous, greedy, or indifferent.
Okay, reputation established. Then came the gossip part, where reputations could be shared.
Exactly. Stage 2, reputation sharing. This was the core. They put subjects into these little groups of 4, tetrads, like tiny social circles where gossip might happen.
Right.
And here, they had 2 really crucial manipulations. First, some subjects were players, others were non-players.
What's the difference?
The players believed their decisions in this stage, how they shared info, could affect whether they got chosen for a second, potentially profitable economic game later on.
So money was on the line for them, a direct incentive.
Exactly. Economic consequentiality. The non-players, though, knew they wouldn't play again, so their gossip, whether honest or not, couldn't directly impact their own earnings.
Clever. That isolates the self-interest motive tied to future gain. What was the second manipulation? I guess it had to be about lying.
You got it. Lying possible versus lying not possible. In the not possible condition, they could only send accurate info. The system basically pre-filled it. No wiggle room.
Okay. Forced honesty.
But in the lying possible condition, they had to manually enter the information. This opened the door to sending incomplete info or straight-up inaccurate info. And crucially, they counted leaving out key details if it was self-serving as a form of lying, too, because it deliberately distorts the picture.
Right. A lie of omission can be just as misleading.
Yeah.
Okay. So, establish reputation, chance to share info, maybe lie, maybe for personal gain. What happened in stage 3? Where did all this reputational info actually matter?
Stage 3 was partner choice. The players then had to choose a partner for that second economic game. the one with potential profit.
And did the reputation info they received actually influence their choices?
Massively. This is crucial confirmation. Subjects overwhelmingly preferred generous partners. Get this. 63% chose a generous partner, only 6% chose a greedy one.
Wow, so reputation really, really mattered to them in a tangible financial way. The gossip, the shared info, clearly worked.
Exactly. It confirmed the information they got in stage 2 was powerful and influenced their decisions directly.
Fascinating setup.
Yeah.
Just incredibly clever. They basically built this little microscopic social world to test these big ideas. Okay, so what did they find? What did this experiment uncover about our motivations for sharing or not sharing information about others? Let's start with the first big finding. Who actually chose to gossip in the first place? Did everyone share info?
Not everyone, no. Overall, about 54% of subjects shared some information, just over half.
Okay.
But what's really telling is who shared. They found what they called a pro-social bias. Meaning the generous subjects, the ones who gave money in stage 1, were the most likely to share information later. About 66% of them did.
Okay, the generous people shared more.
Followed by the indifferent ones at 54%, and then the greedy subjects were the least likely to share. Only 40% of them did.
Interesting. So it suggests maybe a cooperative phenotype, like generous people are just generally generous, even with information, part of their social toolkit.
That seems to be the implication, like it's part of a broader pro-social orientation.
That kind of tracks with everyday experience, doesn't it? But what's the deeper strategy here? Does it suggest some kind of info-sharing pact among the good guys?
Well, here's where it gets really strategic and interesting. That link between being generous and sharing info, it was strongest under 2 very specific conditions.
That's where.
First, when subjects could only share honest information, remember that condition, forced honesty.
Right.
And second, when that honest information could directly affect their own future earnings, meaning if they were players.
So generous people were most likely to share when they had to be honest and when that honesty could benefit them by highlighting their own good reputation.
Exactly. It paints a picture of strategic pro-sociality. Now, contrast that with the greedy people.
Okay.
They were least likely to share info specifically when they had to be honest and when that honesty would obviously hurt their chances of being chosen later.
So they clammed up, chose silence over revealing their own unflattering but truthful reputation.
Precisely. Silence was their strategy to hide their past when honesty wasn't going to help them.
That is a really stark difference in strategy. Wow. Okay, so that's who gossips. What about finding 2 who actually shares inaccurate information? Who lies?
Right. So of the subjects who could lie, remember, that was about half of them, roughly 46%, actually did lie. Sent inaccurate or incomplete info.
Nearly half of those who had the chance. Okay.
And crucially, among those who knew their reputation mattered for future interactions, the players, who do you think were more likely to lie?
Based on what you just said. Gotta be the greedy and indifferent ones.
Bingo. Greedy and indifferent subjects were significantly more likely to provide inaccurate information compared to the generous subjects, but only when they were players.
So the incentive, the potential personal gain from being chosen, was a really strong driver for dishonesty among those who didn't have a good reputation to begin with.
It seems so. What happened when that direct monetary incentive wasn't there for the non-players?
Good question. Did they lie less?
Much less. For subjects who had no skin in the game, no monetary reason to be seen favorably, that tendency to lie was much, much weaker.
Really highlights how that potential for self-benefit, especially material gain, just cranks up the temptation to mislead, doesn't it?
It certainly appears that way in this setup.
Okay, that takes us to finding 3, which sounds like it gets right to the heart of the self-serving nature of gossip. Who tells specifically self-serving lies? And what does that tell us?
Right. So now we're zooming in only on the players who lied, the ones where lying could potentially give them a personal advantage.
Okay.
Among this group, a pretty striking 65% told what the researchers explicitly called self-serving lies.
Meaning lies designed to make themselves look better or maybe make others look worse.
Exactly that. Actively manipulating the information for personal gain.
Okay, 65%. That's a majority of the liars who had something to gain. Can you break that down by their original reputation? That feels like where the pattern would really jump out.
Oh, it does. The contrast is honestly quite stark. Get this. Only 8% of the lies told by generous subjects were self-serving.
Only 8%? So generous people, even when they lied, mostly weren't doing it to make themselves look better.
Apparently not in this context. Maybe they were misremembering or maybe lying for other reasons. We don't know. But compare that to the others.
Yeah. I mean,
A whopping 89% of the lies told by greedy subjects were self-serving.
89%. That's almost all of them.
And 77% of the lies told by the indifferent subjects were also self-serving.
Wow. So the takeaway is pretty clear. Subjects who started out with a history of greed or indifference were overwhelmingly more likely to strategically twist the information to boost their own standing or maybe undermine competitors if they chose to lie at all.
It paints a picture of strategic information distortion, doesn't it? Almost like, as you said, an internal PR department constantly calculating the odds. Is honesty better? Or is a well-placed, self-serving lie the better bet right now?
Okay, wow. So putting all these pieces together, finding 1, 2, and 3, what does this tell us overall about why we gossip? Which theory does it seem to support more?
Well, the evidence really leans heavily towards the reputation-based partner choice and the social competition theories.
The more self-interested ones.
Yeah. People seem incredibly strategic about gossip. They use it, consciously or not, to manage their image, to secure future opportunities, especially for material gain, it seems. That first theory, indirect reciprocity, with its built-in assumption of widespread honesty, it just doesn't fully capture what's going on here, especially when you introduce these clear incentives for dishonesty.
The data suggests honesty isn't the default when self-interest pushes the other way.
Not universally, no.
But hang on, it can't be purely narrow self-interest driving everything, can it? Because you mentioned earlier, the study also found that among the players who could have lied for personal gain, something like 20% of the greedy ones and over half, 52% of the indifferent ones, they still shared information, honestly.
That's a really important point.
Yeah. Why would they do that if it was seemingly against their immediate best interest? If they had a bad reputation and could have hidden it or lied about it, why tell the truth?
That raises a really interesting nuance. It suggests maybe we need a broader view of self-interest. It might not just be about immediate gain.
What else could it be?
It could reflect the perceived costs of being caught in a lie. Think about it. There might be internal costs, like just feeling bad about lying, an aversion to deception.
Sure. Some people just don't like lying.
And maybe more powerfully, there are the external reputational costs if your deceit gets discovered down the line. Being labeled a liar is a pretty damaging social outcome.
Right. That could hurt you way more in the long run than telling an inconvenient truth now.
Exactly. So even a purely self-interested person might calculate that the long-term risk of being caught outweighs the short-term benefit of the lie. That's a powerful social deterrent in itself, isn't it? People are generally pretty worried about being seen as dishonest.
That adds a fascinating layer of complexity. It's not just about the immediate game, but the metagame of reputation over time. Okay, what about the study itself? Any limitations we should keep in mind? It sounds like a very controlled, maybe even simplified environment.
Oh, definitely. And the researchers acknowledge this. They used what you might call a tinker toy model. Anonymous players, one-shot interactions, mostly. Pretty simple information being shared.
Not quite like real-life gossip with friends you've known for years.
Exactly. Real life is way more complex. Long-term relationships, tons of nuance, inside jokes, complex social cues, a much wider range of topics. But the flip side is that this kind of simplified, controlled setup allowed them to achieve really rigorous experimental control.
To isolate the specific things they wanted to test.
Precisely. Like the effect of potential gain or the ability to lie. That would be incredibly hard, maybe impossible, to disentangle so cleanly in a messy real-world setting. So while it's simple, it reveals these potentially fundamental mechanisms at play.
Makes sense. One last point on the methodology. They did use some deception, right? Misleading subjects about the other players being real. That's always a tricky area in behavioral science. How did he address that?
Yeah, they were upfront about that. They acknowledged using deception, but argued it was necessary to achieve the scientific goals of the study, specifically ensuring the players believed their choices had real consequences with other real people.
They felt they couldn't get the same results otherwise.
They considered alternative, like using all real players interacting, but argued those methods would need vastly more subjects, be incredibly inefficient, and potentially raise different ethical issues about transparency and wasted participant time. They believed the deception was justified by the scientific value gain.
And did they check if it affected the results? Like if people were suspicious?
They did. They pointed out that other research suggests this kind of deception doesn't necessarily pollute subject pools or make people behave unnaturally suspicious. And in their own data, the rates of suspicion reported by subjects were similar to non-deceptive studies. Plus, importantly, their main results held up. They remained qualitatively the same, even when they included the suspicious subjects in the analysis.
Okay, so they argue it was necessary and didn't compromise the core findings.
That was their position, balancing the ethical considerations with the need for rigorous control to answer this specific question about strategic information sharing.
All right, so to wrap up this deep dive then, we've journeyed through the world of gossip, and it seems pretty clear it's far more than just, idle chatter.
Far more. It's a pervasive, really powerful tool we use to manage our social world. Helps us figure out who to trust, who to avoid, essential navigation.
Yeah, but while we might like to think we're all about sharing honest information for the good of the group, the data, well, the data suggests our decisions about sharing info, and especially about how accurately we share it, are often deeply rooted in self-interest.
Mm-hmm. Driven by that desire to secure beneficial social partnerships, to choose and be chosen.
It really seems our personal history, whether we tend to be generous or greedy, and whether there's potential gain on the table, profoundly shapes our willingness to gossip, and maybe even our willingness to lie.
It reveals a very strategic mind at work, constantly weighing those social costs and benefits.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. We've talked about these fundamental drivers: self-interest, reputation management, competition in a controlled setting. What stands out to you about how these same drivers might be playing out, perhaps even amplified, in our modern digital world? Where reputations are built, shared, torn down, sometimes distorted, with incredible speed, often from behind a screen. Something to think about.